Chris, my guess is that this isn't going to be the smoothest of processes. What do you see happening after July the 31st?
Well, it'll be a battle, but it's a battle that if Republicans play it smart, and if the president gives them the right kind of nominee, they're going to be able to win because they don't need to beat a filibuster. We've already had the nuclear option when with Neil Gorsuch, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, for the first time in history, said it only took a simple majority of 51 votes to get a Supreme Court nominee through, and they have 50 votes, plus Mike Pence, that gives them 51. So if they hold together, they can ram this through without a single Democratic vote. Democrats can huff and puff all they want, and they'll be very unhappy. As you and Shannon have pointed out, there are a lot of issues where Justice Kennedy sided with the liberal side, the Democratic side of the court, not the conservative Republican side. But, you know, that was a reason this was a big issue in the last election. Donald Trump won. He's probably going to get a conservative justice on the Supreme Court, which will make it a solid 5-4 majority, not a swing vote, a solid 5-4 majority. I think this is the biggest moment of the Trump presidency so far.
Is there a chance in your mind, can you come up with a way that if Democrats work very hard and the president's detractors try all they will, that they could delay this until after the midterms, or is that not going to happen?
No. And first of all, why would you, if you've got a majority and it's only one vote majority, the reason that we're talking about 99 senators is because John McCain, of course, is very ill and hospitalized in Arizona, and he can only vote if he comes back to the floor, and that is not expected to happen anytime soon. So they have a one-vote majority, and while there's a good chance that they will hold that majority or maybe increase it in the midterms, they could lose it. And why on earth, when 50 or 51 votes can put you over the top, would they delay it? And frankly, if you look at the history, I mean, this is happening, what, in late June? There's no reason at all why they shouldn't be able to get a nominee. And my guess is the president will move with some dispatch to get that out there. Then there will be a vetting process. Then the nominee will go up and meet with all of the senators, and then they'll have confirmation hearings and then a confirmation vote. No way at all that this goes past early November, unless there's a real slip-up in the nominee, and you could be sure that whoever is nominated by President Trump, that the Democrats and liberal activist groups will do everything they can to find something that can delay and ultimately disqualify that choice. But the Republicans will be just as careful to make sure that it's somebody who can get through easily, like Neil Gorsuch.
Or try to swing one particular person, which might be a last-ditch effort on somebody's part. I'm not saying that it's possible, but I'm guessing it'll be an effort.
No, and that's a very good point, and that's why, frankly, I disagreed in the last hour with Shannon, said, you know, look for somebody that has a very strong record on, on the conservative side on abortion, on the conservative side on gay rights. I doubt that, because I think that if you had somebody who, for instance, gave you any sense that they might overturn Roe v. Wade, the decision that said that there was a constitutional right to abortion in 1973, that there are several people on the court, including several people in the Senate, including some Republican women, who might not be willing to go for that. So my guess is it'll be somebody who's solidly conservative, but like Neil Gorsuch, won't have a paper trail on some of the most conservative and controversial issues.
Your point on reproductive freedoms and right to life, well taken. And that aside, in a divided nation, what sort of issue can you see bubbling quickly to the top in a world where we have a decidedly conservative Supreme Court?
In terms of what issues that I could see them pursuing?
Yes.
I think, well, look.
It depends on what makes its way up. I'm aware of that, but I just wonder what you think, given the fact that it will be decidedly 5-4 and the discussions which will happen prior to, what might come along quickly? I'm sure people at home are going, what does this mean?
Well, I mean, look, there are certainly going to be, to a certain degree, depends on what issues get before the court. I mean, the court doesn't choose the issue. The issues and the cases choose the court, in a sense. So they'll have to wait for a case to bubble up and get to their level. Obviously, social issues, whether it's gay rights, whether it's abortion rights, you can see all kinds of, I mean, look at what happened here. Executive authority always comes up, as we saw with the decision on the travel ban yesterday. And I will say, I did a power player this last week with Leonard Leo, who's going to be an enormously influential person in this. He's one of the top people in the Federalist Society. He really helped draw up the list of the 25 conservatives, so most of them judges, as we've mentioned, Senator Mike Lee not a judge, but who the choice will almost certainly come from. And when I said to him, what are the key issues, he said, it is observing the Constitution and originalism, interpreting the Constitution as it was written and commonly understood in the 1780s, and that has a lot to do with separation of powers and limiting the administrative state, limiting the bureaucracy. Those will be the key issues that will come up.
Chris Wallace, can't wait for Fox News Sunday this weekend.
I can't either.
A lot to come between now and this. Chris Wallace on Capitol Hill, my friend, thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Shep.
A lot to get to in this very busy news hour. We'll speak with experts on the political side, the legal side, the justice side, if you will, and speak to some everyday Americans as well. And even without this, that may be the biggest development in President Trump's presidency, there were 4 or 5 other lead stories today. We'll mention those as well, just ahead. The breaking news of the day, on a day of lots of breaking news, President Trump now has the chance to nominate another Supreme Court justice after the announced retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy. Our chief White House correspondent John Roberts has his perspective live on the North Lawn. Man, they kept this one under wraps, didn't they?
They did. Well, you know, Justice Kennedy kept it tightly under wraps as well. The president says that he only learned about this early this afternoon when Justice Kennedy rang him up and said, Mr. President, can I come down to see you? But it has been expected for some time. The president in the Oval Office with the president of Portugal paying tribute to Justice Kennedy. Listen here.
Justice Kennedy will be retiring, and he's a man that I've known for a long time and a man that I've respected for a long time. He's been a great justice of the Supreme Court. He is a man who is displaying great vision. He's displayed tremendous vision and tremendous heart, and he will be missed, but he will be retiring.
Other than committing U.S. troops to war, nominating a Supreme Court justice is about the most important thing that a president can do. And in this particular case, the president has a chance to cement a 5-4 conservative majority at the court for a number of years at the very least. Justice Clarence Thomas is the elder statesman of the conservative group. He's 70 years old. Sam Alito right behind him at 68. But Judge Gorsuch and John Roberts probably could serve for another generation, Shep. So depending on who the president nominates, I mean, he could lock this thing up for quite a while to come.
Give us a rundown of what more the president has said about potential nominees, John.
Well, the president he took the unusual step, because I've never seen another White House do this, of releasing a list of 25 names of potential nominees to the Supreme Court. He wants conservative groups to have a clear idea of who he is thinking about in terms of Supreme Court nominees. Conservative groups are very happy with every name on that list, but now begins the task to narrow that list down to a single candidate. Here against the president.
We will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court that will begin immediately. Really had a very deep discussion, I guess, ideas on things, including I asked him if he had certain people that he had great respect for that potentially could take his seat, which is a very hard seat to fill. So we talked about different things, and he was here for about a half an hour.
According to conservative groups, there are no...
Pardon the interruption, but Senator Chuck Schumer now speaking on the floor. Let's hear what he has to say about today's developments.
System, reproductive rights for women, and countless other protections for middle-class Americans are at stake. Will Republicans and President Trump nominate and vote for someone who will preserve protections for people with pre-existing conditions? Or will they support a justice who will put health insurance companies over patients, or put the federal government between a woman and her doctor? The Senate should reject, on a bipartisan basis, any justice who would overturn Roe v. Wade or undermine key health care protections. The Senate should reject anyone who will instinctively side with powerful special interests over the interests of average Americans. Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016, not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Senator McConnell would tell anyone who listened that the Senate had the right to advise and consent, and that was every bit as important as the President's right to nominate. Millions of people are just months away from determining the senators who should vote to confirm or reject the President's nominee, and their voices deserve to be heard now, as Leader McConnell thought they should deserve to be heard then. Anything but that would be the absolute height of hypocrisy. People from all across America should realize that their rights and opportunities are threatened. Americans should make their voices heard loudly, clearly, and consistently. Americans should make it clear that they will not tolerate a nominee chosen from President Trump's preordained list, selected by powerful special interests who will reverse the progress we have made over the decades. I yield the floor.
Selected by powerful special interests. John Roberts, this has been discussed already on this program, that list put together with help.
Yeah, of course. The people like the Judicial Crisis Network, the Federal Society, they have all weighed in on who they would like to see the president pick. The president came up with the list, but it was through consultation, in particular with the White House counsel, Don McGahn. But we should point out, Shep, that according to conservative groups on that list, there is not a single favorite if the president decides to pick a man. We should point out he is only 53 years old, so he could serve for easily a generation. If the president decides to go for a woman, Amy Coney Barrett of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals likely would be the front runner, and she is just in her mid-40s, Shep. So whomever the president picks, if you look at that list and the front runners, he's going to pick a relatively young justice who will serve on that court for a long time to come. Shep?
Indeed, John Roberts, thanks so much for the insight. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says a vote will happen this fall, meaning before the midterm elections, on President Trump's pick to replace Justice Kennedy. Mitch McConnell calling on senators not to base their votes on partisan politics. And he had a similar demand for the next Supreme Court justice. Listen.
It's philosophies or preferences, but from an honest assessment of the words and actual meaning of the law.
Still, some Democrats are accusing the majority leader of hypocrisy for moving so quickly in this election. That's it.
Well, that's part of it, but something very seminal happened about 15 months ago, and that's when the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell decided to invoke nuclear option 2. This was changing the precedent in the Senate of what it takes to clear a filibuster to put somebody on the Supreme Court. There had never been a filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. Now, Abe Fortas was nominated for the Supreme Court. He was already on the court, an associate justice by Lyndon Johnson in 1968, and his nomination to be promoted to be Chief Justice of the United States was filibuster, but he was already on the court. So what happened with Judge Gorsuch last year is that Mitch McConnell realized that there was no route to get over that filibuster because the Senate was so narrowly divided. Now, the Democrats in November of 2013 opened that door, opened Pandora's box, by changing the filibuster rule for most types of nominations for all of their courts and all of their cabinet officials. And then Mitch McConnell basically gave them a dose of their own medicine because he realized there was no way to get Neil Gorsuch on the court. And I the mid-90s, we shouldn't do anything until after the next election. But Chris Murphy, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, he says, wait a minute, the shoe's now on the other foot, Senator. Listen.
We are 4 months out from an election that determines control of the Senate. It's just absolutely hypocrisy for the
Retired, and he didn't give a very good answer. So frankly, that is an unknown, but they've never been able to copy the right on this, Shep.
Oh, they haven't. Thanks very much, Chad Pergram, our man on Capitol Hill. So much more on this breaking news out of Washington coming up during the next half hour, throughout the afternoon, into the evening and the night. We'll talk to a law professor who used to clerk for Justice Kennedy, who is now retiring. The headline from him today is, "It's the end of an era." Plus, a look at some of the other extraordinary news today. New charges against the man accused of killing a woman when he drove into a crowd of people protesting white supremacists in Virginia. We just got that announcement, and we'll have the details on that next. It's the bottom of the hour, the top of the news coming right up. From America's Choice for news and information on cable, this is Fox the next month, July the 31st to be his last day. We now have a copy of the letter that he wrote to the president, and it reads as follows. Dear Mr. President, this letter is a respectful and formal notification of my decision, effective July the 31st of this year, to end my regular active status as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court while continuing to serve in a senior status as provided in this statute. For a member of the legal profession, it is the highest of honors to serve on this court. Please permit me, by this letter, to express my profound gratitude for having had the privilege to seek in each case how best to know, interpret, and defend the Constitution and the laws that must always conform to its mandates and promises. Respectfully and sincerely, Justice Anthony Kennedy. Trace Gallagher with a look at why Justice Kennedy retired now. Hello, Trace.
Hello, Shepard. It's kind of important for context to get a picture of why it is that justices leave, and history kind of indicates that most Supreme Court justices tend to retire under the same party they were appointed, but it clearly doesn't always work out that way. And a prime example is Justice Thurgood Marshall. He was adamant that he wanted to retire under a liberal president, but health forced him to retire under George H.W. Bush. Marshall was then replaced by Clarence Thomas, who, of course, was his ideological opposite. Then there's Sandra Day O'Connor, who, like Anthony Kennedy, was a Republican, George W. Bush, but she also heavily criticized her replacement, Sam Alito, for being too conservative. And then there are the evolving justices. Both David Souter and John Paul Stevens were appointed by Republican presidents, but over the years, both men shifted to the left, and the court shifted right. So they were solidly among the liberal vote. Therefore, both departed under President Obama, allowing him to appoint justices that would maintain their legacy. Then there's the other side of the spectrum. Justice Byron White, a Democrat, was appointed by John F. Kennedy, but over the years, he clearly moved away from Democrats on key issues like abortion, and yet Justice White still chose to retire under Bill Clinton. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is the oldest Supreme Court justice, said back in 2014 that liberals were misguided hiring and replacing Supreme Court justices. Timing is almost everything. Very few die in office, at least in modern times. Most retire. Shepard.
Trace Gallagher, thank you, sir. Let's turn to Mark Sherman now, a reporter who covers the Supreme Court for the Associated Press. It is his only beat. And And today, sir, is a very busy day. Thanks so much for taking time for us.
It's my pleasure.
Some of the issues that are sort of at the forefront now, if you look back over Justice Kennedy's history, there have been times, for instance, on the issue of guns, where he's sided with the conservatives. There have been times when he has sided with the liberals. He's been the swing on the issue of guns. What might we expect to happen with a more conservative justice?
Well, you're right that Kennedy was part of the majority in the Heller decision 10 years ago, in which the court said that individuals had a right, at least in their homes for self-defense, to have a gun under the Second Amendment. But under Kennedy, and it must be said, Chief Justice John Roberts, the court has not yet taken on any other gun issues that would really expand or further delineate those rights. So it remains to be seen whether the change of one justice would make a difference in that regard, though it certainly might.
One issue that many have suggested today
of a case that would have forced some kind of issue, a decision on that issue, the case of Gavin Grimm, a Virginia high school student. We don't know really where Justice Kennedy stands on that issue, although if it's anything like his views on gay rights, he would likely have been a supporter of transgender rights. Those issues are really percolating in the lower courts. To what extent are transgender individuals covered by anti-sex discrimination laws?
When Justice Antonin Scalia died so suddenly, and the nation was certainly saddened by his passing, there were liberals across the country whose next thought was, well, we have to get a new Supreme Court justice in. It didn't happen. There is no chance now, given the political configurations of this day, that conservatives could be disappointed similarly this time. Is there?
It doesn't seem like it, certainly under the new Senate rules without the filibuster, and also with a list of 25, mostly 25 judges that President Trump has already put out there. It seems like whoever he chooses to take Kennedy's place
work for Justice Kennedy. Later became an attorney for the Justice Department. The Department of Justice, argued cases before the Supreme Court himself, now a law professor.
For decades, the Supreme Court has had Justice Kennedy as its center vote, as the person who lawyers would address cases to, as the person who really governed the agenda of the Supreme Court. With Justice Kennedy no longer there, someone else will be playing that role, and it's really the end of an era in the Supreme Court going back since the 1980s.
What was the most important thing to Justice Kennedy about his job? And what was his highest calling within it?
I think it's the seriousness with which he took his approach to the Constitution. Not an approach that necessarily others agreed with, but he's somebody who would wake up in the morning and think about the Constitution and spend his day thinking about the Constitution, trying to get it right, looking at each case. Unpredictable vote, but the seriousness with which he took his job every day for decades as a judge is really what I'll remember most.
It seems a universal truth now that Justice Kennedy was never out to please or displease anyone. If we were to be able to get from him his idea about who his replacement might be, not in the name of a person, but in the way of a description, what do you think he might tell us?
You know, I don't think he would probably offer his views on that question. Of course, it's a difficult question for him to try to answer, but somebody dedicated to the rule of law and somebody dedicated to the Constitution who would approach each case without reference to politics, trying to get it right each time.
What changes in America as a result of his departure from this court?
So Justice Kennedy really brought stability to the Supreme Court. For more than 30 years, he was probably the center vote, if not one of the center votes, who would control which way cases generally went. If you're a lawyer trying to figure out, can I get the Supreme Court to take this view, you have to always think about what is Justice Kennedy going to think. It takes 5 justices among the 9 to have a majority to change the law in a particular direction. And so that center vote is really the one who controls the agenda of the Supreme Court, even though he might not in a particular case be the one who's always necessarily in the majority. With a different Supreme Court, that shifts who's the center vote. It shifts the arguments that are made to the Supreme Court, and it shifts what the Supreme Court might do.
Orrin Kerr, who was a clerk for Justice Kennedy, an attorney at the Department of Justice, argued cases before the Supreme Court himself. Great of you to take some time. Thank you.
Happy to join you.
Think of one of the points that he made. If you were one of the many, many attorneys who were lucky enough and fortunate enough to make an argument before the United States Supreme Court, more often than not, you were tailoring your argument toward not the whole court, but one individual, one man. What will Justice Kennedy think? I have to swing Justice Kennedy, though he hates the word and has said so often. That was exactly what lawyers have always tried to do since Justice Kennedy has been on this court. And now, all of that changes. Our next guest says it's not just President Trump who's under some pressure here, as different groups jockey for a say here and a say there on the next Supreme Court justice. She says Justice Kennedy's retirement